Welcome to Under the Radar, a show about independent iOS app development. I'm Marco Arment.
And I'm David Smith. Under the Radar is never longer than 30 minutes, so let's get started. So you, as the listener, would probably not be aware of this, but Marco and I have actually been doing a fair bit of traveling recently, and so we've been having an interesting cycle of recording shows slightly out of sequence or bunching them up. But for me, the most recent thing was the last week I went on a 110-mile Appalachian Trail backpacking trip, and did it by myself, and ended up with a lot of time to. So I guess as I was wandering around, to think about, think about my work, think about what the things I was making, and as a result of that, I think it came with a topic that would be interesting to discuss here. I guess you could say I developed some perspective while I was out on my walk, and specifically something that I kept coming back to was this feeling that. One of the things that is the biggest challenge I face in my work, and I think as an independent is something that is a pretty common challenge to deal with, is this feeling of how do you deal with difficult, hard, often not particularly interesting problems that are necessary or are part of the part of the work that you do. Because as I was walking along, I was thinking about kind of the tasks that I'd like to do in my apps. What are the big features? What are the things that I want to tackle? And I noticed that almost everything on the list at this point, for a lot of my apps are fairly mature. The things that I run into now are these difficult, hard problems that I know are solvable. It's not like I'm doing some kind of R&D thing where I just want to go and invent some crazy new thing. It's these are problems that I feel like should be in the realm of solvable, but they're difficult, but they're hard. And being motivated to tackle them when it isn't the situation that I have a boss who's assigning them to me. Here's this feature that you must implement. Here's what you're going to work on for the next 3 weeks. If that were the case, that might be a little bit easier. But, when I have to choose to undertake the pain that I know is going to be implementing that feature, going down the road of, lots of dead ends, lots of false starts and, attempts at this particular solution that turns out to not work out. Being motivated to do that is something that I struggle with. But in retrospect, when I look at it, I always, it's some of the features that I'm most proud of tend to be, features where I was able to get over that hump and actually start working, actually get into it, actually solve it, and then I can look back and it's usually that's the cool stuff. That's the stuff that separates my apps from, my competitors are trying to tackle these features. And one thing that I think, and so as a sort of a jumping in point for this, I would have wanted to say is, I've always admired with you, Marco, that it seems like these are the features that you almost seem to relish in doing, that going off on these several month vision quests where you dive down into these really complicated, low level or hard to solve problems, and then coming back with really cool solutions is something that you've done time and time again for all of the products that you've made. And so as I was sitting there or wandering around and thinking about this, I was like, what I need to do? I need to ask Marco, how do you motivate yourself to tackle those kinds of problems when they're going to be difficult to get started with?
I think it's a lot of what satisfies you as a programmer. What do you most like to do? And this is different for a lot of people. Typically, what's fairly common among most programmers is that we like to generally work on new things, at least. So that's one big gimme is we are almost always motivated to work on something new that interests us. For me, one of those things is tricky low-level code. Some kind of low-level dealing with bits or bytes or sound or algorithm type things that aren't too academically hard, but that require low level messing around. I always really enjoy that stuff. So, in Overcast, there's things like the audio engine, all the effects, the smart speed and voice boost effects, that stuff always, I just enjoy it. And when there's something like that I enjoy, like most programmers, I think I would rather work on the kind of thing I enjoy, even if it means, ignoring or procrastinating the more boring things that I probably should also do. I think this is a problem most programmers have. The only question is what those interesting things are. I mean, to me, like, here I was, like, writing this crazy, watch offline transcoding engine, and at the same time, Overcast is almost 3 years old, and I've never had an email change form, and my password resets are, I think, a little bit broken. That is totally backwards priorities. Like, I really I get emails from people, I'd say almost every day, saying, "Hey, is there a way for me to change my account email address?" And the answer is no, there isn't. And there really should be. I should have done that, like, on week 1 or week 2 of Overcast almost 3 years ago, but I haven't, because it's never, the idea of doing that is, like, terminally uninteresting to me, to the point where anything else that I have to do with the app has taken priority over that for the last 2.5 years. And so for me, like, diving into these really hard, tricky problems it's often procrastination, and it's what I like to do. It's the kind of thing I like to do. For me, like, what's heavily motivating usually is either things that make me money directly, like writing an ad system. Writing an ad system has actually been a lot more work than I expected it to be. I'm not like writing a whole network like AdSense or anything, but just putting the parts in place to have a decent ad system that's good for both me and the buyers of the ads and the users, and all the different, like, little management tools you need, like the ability to monitor how they're doing and give people stats and issue refunds if necessary and things like that. I'm having to build all this stuff from scratch, and I've been mostly motivated to do that pretty well because it is directly related to how I'm making money. And it's doing well so far. So that motivates me on that angle. But also I get very heavily motivated by doing something cool with low-level stuff. Like this morning, so we're actually doing live shows. As we mentioned on this show, I think a couple of weeks ago, we are doing Under the Radar live at CocoConf at WWDC. CocoConf is running a conference called Next Door, which is, like, literally next door or down the block from Moscow, or from the San Jose Convention Center, where WWDC is being held. And we will be doing this show live that week on the Tuesday, which is, I think, June 6th, right? At about 1:45 p.m. Pacific. And we're also doing ATP live the day before, the evening before, at CocoConf. At AltConf rather. And so we're doing these live shows, and I thought, it would be nice if I had a soundboard app for ATP and a timer app for this show, and to show on my computer screen during the show.
Sure.
So this morning, I spent this morning writing a soundboard. There are a million soundboard apps out there, but none of them were exactly what I wanted. I wanted, of course, my own custom thing because I'm picky like that. And so I spent the morning writing a soundboard. I was woken up early by my allergies. I couldn't breathe anymore, so I figured, let's get to programming. Can't sleep anymore, so let's get to programming. So that was, novel. It was kind of dealing with audio stuff because, of course, I had to build in things like automatically detecting when the output device becomes unavailable, and putting up a little alert thing on the top so I don't, so I notice that if it happens during recording. Stuff I'm never going to really need. Like, I'm really, that makes no sense. I shouldn't have written my own soundboard app. There's many of them in the App Store, on the Mac App Store. There's probably even more on iOS, and there's even more of them outside of the App Store. But I wrote it anyway because I had a few hours to kill. I was delirious from waking up too early on allergy medicine, and I decided, this is going to be a fun thing to do. And I approached the watch offline playback thing with pretty much the same motivations, minus the allergy component, because it was at the wintertime. And my motivation there was really like, I want to, I wanted to make this feature. And why I wanted to make it, I guess we can get into some other time or maybe later. But I wanted to make this feature, and I knew it was not going to be used by a lot of people. But I thought, if I'm going to do this feature, I need to do it well. And the biggest problem was, on the transferring files to the watch, there's no, I couldn't do smart speed on the watch, and the file transfers were giant and too slow to transfer. So I decided, let me see if I can write a transcoding engine, because iPhones are pretty fast these days. And so what this was kind of like a perfect storm of motivations for me to do something, which is that it was a hard technical challenge. None of my competitors, as far as I know, were doing it. And it accomplished something that I think most people thought wasn't possible or wouldn't have thought to do. And I love that combination. To me, that's a huge motivator. And then to also involve, this low-level audio stuff that I enjoy so much, was just the cherry on top. And then, of course, optimization, trying to make the transcodes faster. It's a fun game to play when you're a programmer. Of hey, if I change the way I do this, it becomes 10 times faster. Let's see how many times I can do that. And it ends up just being very satisfying. And this is one of the problems with being an indie and not having anybody telling me what I need to be working on. That oftentimes these kind of deep dives into difficult technical features, oftentimes these are not a good idea. Oftentimes they're not an efficient use of your time. In fact, I would say probably most of the time they aren't an efficient use of your time. But because I define my own to-do list, basically, and that's one of the benefits of doing your own products, because I define my own to-do list, I basically take the indulgence of doing cool things like this, because let's be honest, it is largely an indulgence to be able to do stuff like this, because a lot of times you're not going to get paid back on it. I mean, I did this entire watch offline playback feature, and so far it's being used by something like 0.2% of users every day. It's very, very low, according to my awesome home-built analytics, which I also built. But it actually isn't awesome. It is home-built analytics. I would not describe it as awesome. But so it's being used by very few people. It probably isn't the best idea for business to have done it, if I'm honest with myself. But it was a really hard problem that satisfied me immensely while working on it. It is right in my wheelhouse of low-level audio stuff that I enjoy working on so much. And it gave me a competitive advantage, even though it's a very, very small one. But it gave me a competitive advantage, at least for the time being. And I'm sure that won't last very long, but for the time being, it's there. And so all those, it forms motivation, when it has a combination like that. Whereas if you are somebody who doesn't like working on low-level C code or dealing with core audio stuff, or whatever your hard problem that's facing you might be, if that doesn't interest you, I totally get why you wouldn't want to do it, or why you'd procrastinate it, or just try to find ways around doing it. And there's lots of things like that for me, just not this kind of thing.
Yeah, because I feel like what I'm hearing is it's the first step is to kind of try and understand yourself, and understand what things are going to, what things you're going to enjoy building. Are you going to be motivated to build? What's the kind of thing, what would feel like low-level audio stuff just sounds awful to me. My little experience with that has always been, pain and suffering rather than, joy and delight. And so for me, so it's those probably aren't the directions that, would motivate me to go into. And I think maybe there's something interesting in understanding that, and you and I in some ways are as similar at, professionally as two people could be in some ways. We've both been doing basically the same job for the last 8 years. We do it in sort of fairly similar ways. We make our living fairly similarly. But even still, we have these very different preferences and things that we would the parts of the job that we actually enjoy. And so it's good to just, I think, be introspective probably first at understanding, when I see myself procrastinating, I think one of the things that I've started to try and ask myself is why don't I want to do that? Because usually there's a reason, and sometimes it's a good reason, and sometimes it's a bad reason. But I end up with but you end up with this funny situation of, at a certain point, like either when you're independent, you either will be in the situation where the thing just won't get done, because there's not like there's someone else on the team who it can get punted to. It's like you're going to do it or you're not. And so trying to at least understand why you're not doing it. There are many features, and I mean, I have whole apps that, I've half-heartedly built, or I didn't, it's like for some reason didn't catch my imagination, I guess you could say. It's like if it doesn't have that, can't get over that initial hump, it'll just sit there and kind of languish. And even when it might, from a business perspective, be a good idea, or from a utility to the world perspective might be a good thing. Like, if it doesn't catch my attention, I know I won't really be able to do it. And so it is something that I don't, but I think increasingly, and this is where I was trying to think, so I'm sort of coming around to, is, well, while I think that is how I've acted for a long time now. Like, I look at my business and I think, like, I think I'm, by allowing myself to do only the things that I enjoy, I'm probably hurting the effectiveness of my business, which is problematic in some ways. But honestly, like, the more fundamental thing that I'm starting to worry about, and I'm starting to think about a lot more, is I'm not getting better at a very fast rate anymore. That my skills and my abilities, as I go down as I keep doing the things that I'm good at and enjoy doing, I get incrementally better at doing those things, but I don't tackle these bigger, harder problems. And it's like your example of like a password reset form or an email change form. Like, it's not that that's a hard tech problem to do, but I know for myself, I have all these features sort of in that vein that I haven't done. And as a result, like, they're probably disproportionately more difficult to do than they should be, because it shouldn't be that hard to do some of these things. They're fairly straightforward, but if you put them off for long enough, and at a certain point, it actually does become difficult because you become very rusty at doing those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, although honestly, it would take a lot of rust to be too rusty to make an email change form. But
sure,
and there's a couple things there I want to unpack. One of them, the getting better at new things and learning new things, that I think we should come back to. But also, I think it's important that, as I mentioned, like, one of the benefits of working for yourself is being able to look at a lot of the things that the world wants you to do, or that you think you're obligated to do, and on some of those you can just say no. And not all of them. Some of them are more important than others. Some of them there's more ramifications if you don't do them. That you should think about. But like so many things, I think there's a healthy balance to be found. You're an indie. You have the ability to not do stuff you don't want to do. And you have the ability, as I said earlier, to take the indulgence of working on something that might not be worth the time you're putting into it in pure business terms, but that you might want to do anyway. It's kind of like eating dessert. That's why I use the term indulgence, because, like, you're allowed to give yourself that. You're allowed to do something cool that it doesn't make sense from the business, as long as you don't only do that. As long as you don't do that out of balance, such that your business will suffer and you won't be able to do this anymore. Like, and this is a balance that many companies and indies have a hard time striking. Everyone has, like, their pet project they would love to do, or their preferred way of doing things, and if it doesn't make sense business wise to do that, you can still do it sometimes. You can have fun with things. You can have side projects. You can take the indulgence of doing some kind of, like, crazy ridiculous thing to make your app 1% better because you just wanted to do it. That just can't be all you do. And similarly, the list of things that, like, it's a huge problem if you don't do them, there are a few things on there that's true for, but that isn't true for the whole list. And as an indie, I feel like you should let yourself have that. That's part of, we as indies, we do a lot more, administration and management of stuff like taxes and accounting and all that stuff. Like, we take on a lot of burdens there, and we also take a huge risk compared to people who work for other people. And I think part of the reason we take that, and part of the payoff of doing that, is this ability to misspend some of our time because we can decide to do that as long as it doesn't cause problems for the business as a whole. As long as we keep everything in balance.
This episode of Under the Radar is brought to you by Away. Your luggage shouldn't cost more than your plane ticket, and that's why Away makes premium suitcases with fantastic features for under $300. Go to awaytravel.com/radar and you can peruse their entire collection of suitcases, all made with premium German polycarbonate. The interior of an Away suitcase features a patent-pending compression system that is helpful if you're an overpacker. They have a 4-wheel, 360-degree spinner system that is awesome for navigating tight spaces, a TSA combination lock, a removable washable laundry bag, and also a great feature, which is a USB power brick integrated right into the case. So when they sent me one of these to try out, the thing that I love to see that it's, it says that it can charge my phone up to 5 times. What I was really curious to see is how that would work with something other than a phone. And so I took my 12-inch MacBook, a USB-A to USB-C connector, plugged it in, and it reports itself as a 10-watt charger, which is great. You never know when you're going to need to get some work done and your laptop is running low and you don't have access to a plug. Now you could just plug right into your suitcase. And that's kind of cool. Away believe in the quality of their products. This is why they offer a lifetime guarantee. If anything breaks, they'll fix it or replace it for life. They also have a 100-day trial and free shipping on any order within the lower 48 states. You can live with it, travel with it, try it out, and if at any point you decide it's not for you, you can return it for a full refund. No questions asked. Travel smarter with a suitcase that charges your phone or your MacBook, as I found out. To find out more, go to awaytravel.com/radar, and you can use the code RADAR at checkout to get $20 off any of their suitcases. That's awaytravel.com/radar, and use code RADAR at checkout for $20 off. Thank you to Away for their support of this show and all of Relay FM.
All right, so I think it is worth coming back a little bit to what you said earlier about that you aren't getting better as quickly as you used to, or as quickly as you want to. And that's so, if you do like the indie indulgence, I do what I want kind of thing, like for too long, then this is a problem. That like you will only do the things that you want to do, and you won't get better at other things. And I have the same problem in a lot of areas. For example, things like I haven't really been pressured to learn Swift because why would I? Like as we've discussed, like there's some reasons I'm kind of interested in it a little bit and everything, but like when it comes down to what I actually do day to day, there's nothing really pushing me to learn it right this second, or to convert anything, or to write new code in Swift, right now. There is no big standard. We also talked about how neither of us are very heavy unit testers. There's nothing forcing us to become heavy unit testers. But certain things do bring new topics to us and new skills to us out of necessity. So things like, when the App Store economic landscape shifts around, we're forced to do different types of business models. We're forced to try things like freemium and ads and things like that. And so I feel like just being in this ecosystem does push us into a few new things here and there, but obviously not, every kind of thing. I'm wondering, like, is there a specific kind of area or example that you feel like you should be getting better in, but just are not being pressured to?
I mean, I think the hardest thing about that question is that it falls a lot in it's an unknown loss, that it's hard for me to know exactly if there's a particular area where I'm deficient, because in some ways, by the very nature of it being a deficiency, being an area that I'm not exposed to, being something that I'm not, forcing myself to undertake, I don't understand what I'm missing out on. And so it's tricky. But I think about the situations where, I used to be really scared about dealing with low-level core graphics stuff. That was an area, like doing animations or things like that I used to think were really, it was just this little black box that I never opened up, that it was just terrifying to me. And more recently, I've gotten used to that. And in Activity++ was an area where it's I hit this wall where I was trying to make this animation, and all of a sudden it's the only way I'm going to be able to do this is if I drop down a level. And so it's like, well, I really liked this thought I had in my mind for what the animation would look like. And so I dove in and I really, like learned all this crazy stuff and got it to work. And it's like, now I have this whole other tool set that, I can, as I'm looking at problems in my other apps or in new apps, I have this whole tool set that I just completely didn't have before. And these capabilities that I didn't even, like, I sort of intellectually knew probably existed, but I didn't really understand what that meant. And I think that is like that experience that you can sort of intellectually know that something is possible, but until you've actually done it, it can be really, you don't really know what you're missing out on. And I think when the thing that I'm trying to sort of chasten myself with in this experience, or like in this thought process that I've been having recently, is I don't know what all those things are that I'm missing, but I know that they exist. And I want to try and motivate myself to tackle problems that are difficult so that I can discover what those things are. Because, the things that I do understand, the things that I have a great handle on, are the things that are easier, or the things that came more naturally to me. Like another area that I think is something that I'm trying to think about more is having a better understanding around graphic design, not necessarily in terms of like app design, but in terms of, like actual art type of things, and having a better sense of that, where like right now it's this big scary thing that like I could never do that. But I guess history has shown me that all these things that I say, oh, I could never do that, are probably just things that I haven't tried and applied myself to. And it's an interesting reminder that, that's the skills that I have now at some point probably look like these other things look to me now do.
Yeah, that's fair. But, I think also like the life of an indie it's broad. Like they're like I think graphic design is a good example, because like there are lots of things like deep low level programming things that we won't need to know or shouldn't know, because we have to be a little more broad, and we have to also know about things like accounting and business setup to some minor degree, and things like graphic design and marketing. Like there is so much out there that we need to know that, like, you might have already picked up lots of these things along the way, but you might not be giving yourself credit for them. Like you might, it sounds like certain things that you perceive as like these big walls that are intimidating to you in some way, that those things count in professional development or betterment, but that the things that you pick up along the way of being an independent person and doing things the way that you do them, especially like so thoroughly and analytically, you've built and picked up lots of skills along the way in that area that you probably don't even, that you probably just, did it so gradually or so automatically, or did it without thinking too much about, how you were bettering yourself during that time, that you aren't even giving yourself credit. But that all counts. Like you were getting better. You've been getting better at lots of things over time. They just might not be like low level APIs.
Sure. And I mean, maybe, yeah, I think you're probably true that I'm being too hard on myself with this thought process. But yeah, I think maybe the final takeaway to think about this is just, I think it is probably a good thing to be conscious of how we're approaching difficult problems, to see if we're not doing them or we're not approaching them for the right reasons. Because fair enough, I'm never going to be as good of an icon designer as someone like Louis Mantia. Like,
I mean, to be fair
enough,
very few people ever will.
Yeah, right. And so like, it's not like my goal is to do that. It's not that I'm trying to be everything and to accomplish all of like, to do everything all my own. But just because I can't get to that end, it's probably still good for me to look at something and say, well, what could I do? What could I learn? What's one area that I can try and solve a difficult problem, and by doing so, make myself better? And that is almost certainly going to be a productive exercise.
And with that, we're out of time this week. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.